Hello? Rescue hooks to rescue, Mayday! Get ahead, West. Fast, Mayday, what's your location? Get the panel out of here, hurry up! We need radio silence, I need water in that 2.5-inch line. 48 inch water in a 2.5-inch line. To the rope, to the rope, to the rope! 35 in the rear, 35 in the rear!
Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Hey there, welcome back to the Emergency Traffic Podcast, where we talk about firefighter and paramedic line of duty deaths and try to learn from these tragic incidents so that we can prevent them from happening in the future. This is episode 51, and Denis and I are going to discuss a tragic fall from an aerial ladder during a training evolution in Los Angeles in June of 2017. A firefighter was carrying some tools up the ladder, lost his grip, his balance, and fell to his death. Please sit down, relax, and enjoy the discussion. Okay, well, so hello, Denis. How's it going today?
Very good, Paul. It's just the Paul and Denny show today, apparently.
Yeah, everybody's either working or vacationing in Spain or doing ride-alongs,
Right.
or whatever.
Or like some of our co-hosts, we're like the two old guys up in the gallery on the Muppet Show.
I like it. That's us. Yeah, retired guys. We can squeeze the time in and heckle.
They were actually my favorite characters on the Muppet Show.
I know. Yeah. There's a name. What's their name?
Statler and what was the other guy's name? Yeah. Anyways, I had a couple of my cohorts when I was in the Niagara region. We used to hold regular conferences and stuff, and these two guys used to do the guys in the gallery. That was their shtick. So as co-hosts, it was pretty funny. Have us all laughing, of course. So it's the humor, right? You know,
Statler and Waldorf.
That's it. Yeah.
Statler and Waldorf.
Yeah.
On that note,
I'm not sure which one of us is which, but whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I got some brown hair still. Ooh.
Yeah, so do I, but it's not on my head. I think it's growing out of my ears. Never mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Too much information.
What's new in the fire service these days in Canada, anyway?
Yeah, there's stuff going on, eh? I mean, you know, there's always stuff going on. So I was just reading in Firefighting in Canada that there's a report been released by the BC Injury Research and Prevention Unit that's talking about the leading cause of deaths in firefighters in Canada, and it's, at least in BC anyways, they studied 15 years of data, and they say that cancer is continuing to be the biggest killer. So, and it says, I'll just read a paragraph here. It says, in line with previous research, this 15-year report says pinpoints cancer as the leading cause of firefighter death, making up 85% of claims through the workers' comp from 2007 to 2021, which is nearly double the 43% for the general population. So that's higher, I think, than the ratio that we're used to hearing. Of course, that would be different for each different type of cancer. So they also worth noting is the continuing rise in firefighter mental health time loss claims over the last 15 years, which sharply increased post-2015, with longer serving members are more at risk. So in death claims, the highest for those aged 65 and up, while both mental health time losses and total injury claims are highest for those in the 40s to 60s. One of the things that we used to talk about was the fact that firefighters retired and then they got seriously ill and died, and how tragic that was. And this data kind of supports that. Although I think, based on my experience, I'm also seeing younger and younger people getting cancer too and being seriously ill or dying from that too. So, I mean, the message there, of course, is, you know, take every precaution, keep yourself clean, and be aware that, you know, cancer is an occupational hazard.
Yeah, I think actually the young people cancer incidence is sort of what drove some of the studies into donning and doffing, and how we need to treat each live active fire as a hazmat scene, and we need to doff our clothing on air so that we're not breathing in the contaminants while we take our clothes off, especially our helmet and our coat and our balaclava. And if we can do that on air, then we're in a clean atmosphere while we're doing that, because we're aerating all that those aerosols and those particulate in particular. And then also, the first thing you do, you've been fighting a fire for 4 hours, is you probably find a place to go to the washroom, and maybe you didn't clean up properly. So, that's where a lot of the young cancer is coming from. And of course, now the particulate in the fire stations, which has been around for a long time, and it's gotten better, and the trucks are cleaner, but a lot of stations have old trucks still. And then also the PFAS, discovering that the polynated fluorines are in the foam and in the turnout gear. And that's why these young people with not a lot of exposure are all of a sudden, getting cancer. I've been fortunate so far that I know of, and I think you have too, is that, we're okay, but I don't know why.
Yeah, and I was the last few months earlier this year. I wasn't quite the last few months, but earlier this year I was working on some truck specifications with a fire department, and the new standard for fire trucks is now is NFPA 1900, and that replaced 1901 and 1906 and a few of the other standards, and that came into force on January the 1st. And there's a fair amount in there now that talks about the clean truck concept. And one of the things that you need to be looking at if you're specifying vehicles is a completely cleanable interior of the vehicle, the cab in particular. And like for instance, like Bostrom, for instance, who makes a lot of firefighter seats. There are options available with removable covers in the seats, and they now make a seat, for instance, that's completely cleanable. It's impervious. It's not hard plastic, but it is a completely encased plastic, both the cushion and the back and the seat itself, and it's completely cleanable. And you need to be very aware of that and make sure that any switches or electrical outlets or anything else that are in the cab will stand up to thorough and deep cleaning, for instance. Like no places like where you've got joins and coverings on the floor or anything, nothing like that that will trap dirt. And the manufacturers are offering those things now, and they're what they're calling their clean cap technology. So that's available now too, and you should seriously be looking at that. And Paul, you said older vehicles, but a lot of those are retrofittable, and you can look at these things. And I think the situation now is that you're going to start seeing vehicles in service longer and longer, maybe not with their original owners, but certainly with subsequent owners. And you're going to be going forward with that. And so you need to be paying a lot of attention to it. There's no point in saving a bunch of dollars buying a secondhand truck when you're just inheriting a cancer problem for your members. So you need to spend the money. And in fact, in a lot of jurisdictions, buying a used truck requires it to be recertified through occupational health and safety because it's a certifiable item. A lot of legislation requires that, so you need to be looking into that also. And so these are just, I think, all things that collectively, I think, make a difference.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the decon at the scene and taking the gear and bagging it and getting it cleaned. And it's hard to do. It requires a lot of people. You've been in there, you did a couple bottles, and now you've got to take a break, and you don't have your gear anymore, so you can't do anything else. So it does take a lot of people, but it's a commitment that, and a lot of big cities are making that commitment or trying. But logistically, it's a challenge to keep down on the contamination. The article came out like 4 or 5 years ago about every fire is a hazmat, and we need to treat it that way, because, as you say, the statistics aren't lying. What, 85%? Cancer rate, 2 times more than the regular population in the study you're referring to in BC that came out in firefighting in Canada. We need to pay attention to this as leaders, and each of us needs to take care. Don't hang out in your gear when you don't need to, and don't hang out in the apparatus bays when you don't need to try to minimize your exposure to stay in this career and not get cancer.
Yeah, absolutely. And as fire chiefs and officers and union executives and all those people, you need to get together on this. This is not a thing to fight over. You need to get together on this, and you need to work hard together, and you need to get the funding that's necessary, and you need to get the support that's necessary to address these issues. These are not things to fight over, because while you're fighting over them, people are dying.
Yeah, no, it's good information that's out there. Show season's on. I see the Alberta Chiefs had their fire chief show in Saskatchewan, I think, and BC, and then it'll be moving east to Ontario and Quebec and on and on. So that's always an interesting time of year if you can get out to see what's new in technology and information and network with your peers. And our friend in Europe now, I can't remember his name on LinkedIn there. He's got some new newsletters and stuff out about construction fires. Of course, they had that big fire in Copenhagen where the stock exchange burned during construction. A lot of similarities with Notre Dame and other buildings that have caught fire during construction. In fact, there was a big one yesterday in, I think, Riverside, California, a big
Yeah,
condominium
renovation.
complex. Yeah, under construction.
Renovation and construction both. Yeah.
Renovation. Yeah, so something to watch out for. And these are in the one in Copenhagen. There's a video that the firefighters had to climb inside the plastic wrapped scaffolding to get at the building to try to assess it and see if they could do any firefighting, of which they couldn't. The big roof and big timbers and stuff, and they had no access to master streams or anything because the whole building was wrapped in plastic. So difficult situation for that.
Yeah, there are standards and good guidelines that the fire department should be applying in their jurisdiction. When they see a building under major renovations, they should be talking to the building owners. They should be talking to the renovation companies. They should be pushing the agenda of fire safety.
Yeah, because the risk is much higher. I remember we were inspecting. There was a big project out in Rocky Mountain House one time, and of course, they'd set up a kitchen inside the building that wasn't supposed to. It's an arena, and they had all kinds of construction materials stored in there, and they had a kitchen in there with a microwave and a kettle and all this other stuff. And we're going, guys, you can't store stuff in here. The building's not designed for it. There's no detection, and you can't be cooking in here, like extension cords and microwaves and whatever. It's like kettles, and it's like, well, why not? This is because it's a fire hazard. But yeah, we need to stay on top of that at all times. What else can you do? Anyway, so this week's incident that we're going to talk about happened in June 3rd of 2017. A 29-year-old career firefighter fell while carrying a roof kit, which was two 6-foot trash hooks strapped together with webbing for a shoulder carry, while he was ascending an aerial ladder during a training exercise in Los Angeles City.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the fire department, and this information, Paul, comes from a NIOSH report, I believe, right?
That is correct.
So that was released in June of 2018, so about a year after the incident. So a little bit about the fire department. At the time of this incident, the career fire department had 114 stations with 3,588, so 3,600 uniformed members, serving a population of over 4 million within an area of about 471 square miles. So big department. We all know who this is. So all department members work a 24-hour duty shift for 3 out of 9 days, which is an average of 56 hours per week. In 2016, the fire department responded to a nearly 15,000 actual fire incidents. That's not total calls, that's just fire incidents, with 90% of the responses arriving on scene in less than 5 minutes. At the time of this incident, which I'll remind you was in June of 2017, the fire department had 127 ambulances, 101 engines, 49 trucks, 15 brush apparatus, 4 foam tenders, 4 rehab air tenders, 2 fuel tenders, 1 heavy rescue apparatus, 5 marine units, boats, 2 emergency lighting units, and 6 helicopters. Specialty units consisted of a swiftwater rescue teams, airport companies, hazardous materials squads, bicycle medic teams, obviously for major events, and urban search and rescue companies. All fire department apparatus was maintained by the city's Fleet Maintenance Division, with annual testing of the fire apparatus and ambulances conducted by qualified vendors, so third party. All advanced life support ambulances were staffed by the fire department. Probably dual qualified personnel is my guess on that, but don't quote me on that.
Just
So a
a
little bit of,
comment, before you
Yeah.
get to the next part. Speaking of the third party annual testing, and before we started the show here, I was talking about an incident I was involved in where the department did all their own testing. So they did their own repairs. They had a fleet division and stuff like that, but they also did their testing. And unfortunately, an incident happened where a piece of equipment failed critically. And when the manufacturer came to investigate, as soon as the manufacturer found out that they were doing all their own inspection and testing, the manufacturer just basically wiped their hands and said, "Hey, this is on you. You guys do the testing. If you didn't detect it, it's not our problem." And so that third party testing, it's not a bad idea. A lot of departments like to do their own pump testing and ladder testing and stuff like that, but it's not a bad and SCBA testing. It's not a bad idea to have that third party, because then you have a certificate and a trail of accountability, and it's someone who's not biased who's working on the project. So it gives you a second set of eyes to look at stuff. So just something to mention about that. Sorry to interrupt there, Denny.
Well, plus your independent third testers get to see a lot of different um, departments. So, they may see something that's a trend in a particular maker model of pump, and it may not have happened to you yet. So your maintenance people may not have experienced that yet. And they may know about this weakness, if you will, or issue, and know to check for it and possibly save you some grief
Mm-hmm.
through preventive maintenance. So that
Yeah,
extra set of
good
eyes is really good.
good
And
point.
in the studies that I've done with, I've done close to 15, almost 20% of the fire departments in Nova Scotia, there's always an issue about the costs of these third-party testing agencies. And I'll tell you, it's money well spent for those reasons. Yes, it's not that hard to do pump tests yourself. It's hard to do them properly because
Yes.
because you need specialized equipment to do it, and you need the skills, and not everybody has those. It's not just a matter of whacking up the throttle and hoping nothing breaks. It's much more complicated than that. And so it's really good to have experts come and do that, because that's what they do. That is their job. And so they're
Yep.
clearly going to be better at it than you are when you do it once a year when you think of it. So it's money well spent, and in the long run, it's just it's in the single digit percentages of your overall cost, so it's well worth it.
Yep. For sure. Good point.
Anyway, talking about the training and experience of the members in the fire department, says the state required all career firefighters to have completed training equivalent to the National Fire Protection Association standard 1001. And 1001 is the standard for firefighter professional qualifications. The fire department provided up to 20 months of recruit training to certify firefighters to the state's Firefighter 1 curriculum. So the state had its own curriculum. And the curriculum was a combination of NFPA 1001 and IFSTA, which is the International Fire Service Training Association's essentials. And at the time, so it would have been probably the 2013 edition of IFSTA Essentials. So for those of you who are not familiar with the IFSTA Essentials, it's one of a couple main standards that are available. That they're not standards, rather, excuse me. They're training syllabuses, if you will, and they're largely based on the NFPA 1001 and 1021 and the other professional standards, and they provide a lot of really good information and a good way to provide the training. So anyway, so the state curriculum was a combination of the NFPA 1001 and the IFSTA Essentials. And this was then followed by the department for a 1-year probationary program, during which there would be supervised training because they're on probation. And additional training also occurred during the probationary period that was focused on equipment and operations, of which 5 months in particular were spent working with an engine company and another 5 months working with a truck company. And at the 4-month and the 9-month intervals during that probationary year, probationary firefighters returned to the fire academy and conducted written tests.
It's obviously an extensive training program. I like that, with the 5 months on a truck and 4 months on an engine or whatever, to really get that experience and then go
Yeah,
back for your test. So that's
yeah,
obviously a
good,
rigorous training program.
good program.
Yeah. The structure where this incident occurred was a commercial structure that was built in 1897. It was a 6-story center hallway type structure that was comprised of 165 guest rooms and was approximately 100,000 square feet in area. The structure to the top of the parapet wall was approximately 65 feet high, and the structure had been used routinely by the fire department for training exercises. It was a hotel, and it was in operation at the time of the incident. We've added a bit of a virtual 360 here for you based on the pictures and stuff we see in the report. The training site was an urban street out in front of a Type 3 ordinary brick construction building, about 6 stories tall, turn of the century hotel occupancy. There were 20 to 30 foot high trees along the sidewalk in front of the hotel, and large hotel room windows with ornamental stone window sills on all floors that were facing the street, the Alpha side. There was a large retro, I called it, a vertical hotel sign on the Alpha Bravo corner, about 60 to 70 feet high, that ran the whole corner of the building. The Bravo side was another street because the building was on a corner lot. The Charlie side was another similar building, and the Delta side is a paved vacant lot or parking lot. There was a medical fire escape on the Alpha side at the Delta corner, so on the front face, the Alpha side of the building. The aerial device that was being used was an American LaFrance tiller of early 2000s vintage, I'm guessing here. Possibly an Aerial Innovations 100-foot straight ladder, because that's who was building ladders for LaFrance around that time. The aerial was parked directly in front of the Alpha side, longitudinally in line with the building, straddling the first 2 lanes of the street. On June 3rd, 2017, Fire Station 9 was briefed by the station captain at the morning lineup that a training exercise would be conducted later that day. The following apparatus and equipment and staff were involved in the training. So there was Truck 9, the acting captain and apparatus operator, and 3 firefighters. Task Force Commander, which was an acting captain. Engine 9, which also had an acting captain, an acting engineer, and 2 firefighters. And then Engine 209 was also there with a captain, an engineer, and 2 firefighters. Rescue 9 also came along, and it had 3 captains as training observers and an acting engineer to operate the engine.
So that's who was on scene for this training exercise. A few words about personal protective equipment. During the training evolution, the firefighter who perished in this incident, he was wearing his bunker coat and pants, his hood, his boots, his helmet, and was also wearing a self-contained breathing apparatus, although he wasn't on air at the time. And that was equipped with an integrated PAS system, personal alert system, safety system, so integrated into the SCBA. He was also carrying a radio in his radio pocket on his bunker coat, probably on the chest, and his face piece was in a storage post, which is a pouch which was attached to the BA harness, and he had his gloves in his bunker coat pocket. The weather at the time was sky conditions were light haze, and there was 5-mile visibility, and the temperature was 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and winds were calm. So it doesn't sound like weather was a particular factor that day. Post-incident, there was an investigation, and this is what they discovered. On June the 3rd of 2017, the 29-year-old career firefighter, pardon me, fell while carrying a roof kit up an aerial ladder during a training exercise. The firefighter had started his shift at 0700 hours that day after having been off duty for the previous 48 hours. At the morning lineup, the station captain informed the company that they would conduct on that day a training evolution on center hall operations, and this operation would be to simulate a fire incident on the 4th floor of a local 6-story hotel. And remind you that at the hotel was occupied at the time and was operating at the time of the drill. The training involved an aerial ladder, 2 engines, and a rescue, i.e. a paramedic ambulance. The firefighters were wearing their personal protective equipment, including their self-contained breathing apparatus. Many of the firefighters were up for promotion and would be stepping up to act in their promotable positions during the drill. After 0900 hours, the station's apparatus headed to the training site and stopped 2 blocks away from the site before going on scene in order for the members to transition into their acting roles and to switch their radios to Training Tactical Channel 19. They then rolled into the scene, and on arrival, the incident commander gave a size up and crew assignments. The apparatus operator spotted the aerial ladder in front of the hotel, raised the aerial ladder to a 73-degree angle, and extended the 100-foot ladder to about the 86-foot mark, which placed the unsupported ladder tip near the roof line. Remember, there's a parapet on this, in accordance with the manufacturer's guidelines. So the ladder was extended, rotated towards the building, placed at a 73-degree angle, was extended out to the 86 feet. The engine companies then pulled hose line and entered the hotel to ascend to the 4th floor. The truck company's job was to ascend the aerial ladder and enter the hotel through the roof bulkhead door, which would have been at the top of the stairs, and descend to the 4th floor. The firefighter who was first to ascend was assigned the top member, and he grabbed a roof kit, and the roof kit consisted of 2 6-foot rubbish hooks strapped together, totaling 20 pounds in weight. So these roof hooks are basically 2 forks at 90 degrees to the rest of the tool itself. Sometimes called Boston trash hooks, or I've heard them called various names. And anyway, so he took these 2 hooks strapped together, and he cantilevered them over his left shoulder with the D handles facing to the rear. In other words, he put them over his shoulder like you might carry a shovel on your shoulder, holding onto one end, the hook end near his chest, I guess, and the rest of the tools, 6 feet long, sticking out behind him over his shoulder. So note that the roof kit is supposed to be carried over the shoulder through the use of a webbed strap. So the strap is fastened at the fork ends and at the D-handled ends, and you just hang that over your shoulder, giving you both hands. So the roof kit is supposed to be carried over the shoulder using a webbed strap, and it's unknown why the firefighter did not utilize the strap to carry the tools. After the incident, it was noted that part of the strap was missing, but it is not known if this occurred prior to or during the incident. The part that was missing was the part that kept the D-handles together and would have fastened to the end of the strap. So one end was attached to the fork ends and the other end was free. This is after the incident. This is what they noticed. So at approximately 3 minutes and 44 seconds after arrival, the top member stepped upon the pedestal. This is a tractor trailer aerial, so the turntable's in the middle, and began to ascend. As soon as the tiller member saw the top member reach the top of the bed section, the tiller member also then began to ascend. When the tiller member had reached the inner midsection of the aerial ladder, in other words, the top of the base section, he noticed that the top member had stopped approximately 60 feet up the aerial ladder and was adjusting the roof kit strap from his left shoulder to his right shoulder. Then the tiller member noticed that the apparatus operator was starting to ascend behind him. So there were 3 people ascending the ladder at this point. Approximately 4 minutes and 44 seconds after arrival, the tiller member heard a yell, and he looked up to see the top member falling down the left-hand side of the ladder. The tiller member tucked in close to the right-hand side of the ladder, and as the top member brushed by him and then brushed by the apparatus operator, who was still near the bottom. The station captain, who was the training organizer and was also an observer, heard yelling and saw the firefighter as he was falling the last 15 feet, and immediately looked for available paramedic. Remember, there were a couple of them there with the ambulance. The firefighter landed on the deck portion of the apparatus below, just to the left of the turntable. So he landed on the hard checker plate deck. The incident commander was in the command vehicle and heard a crash, and then noticed a helmet lying on the street. The incident commander radioed that the exercise was effectively terminated at that point, and he ran over to the truck and saw the apparatus operator starting to attend to the fallen firefighter. The acting engineer from Engine 9 had heard the yelling, followed by a loud thud, and then went running to the truck to see the apparatus officer removing the top member who had fallen, his SCBA, and the truck captain was holding the firefighter's head. The Engine 9 acting engineer proceeded to get the backboard from Rescue 9. The acting engineer on Engine 209, who was a paramedic, and the hydrant member on Engine 9, who was on the 4th floor when this happened, he had heard the firefighter fall and ran over to assist. Approximately 4 minutes after the fall, the incident commander drove the rescue unit to the local trauma center with the station captain in the officer's seat and 2 paramedics in the rear attending the firefighter. On June the 5th, the firefighter succumbed to his injuries, in other words, 2 days later.
Yeah, tragic. And, happened so fast, right? You don't even know. Like all of a sudden, bang. The investigators identified the following items as key contributing factors in this incident that ultimately led to the fatality. As you know, there's usually several factors that lead to these things. Obviously, as they saw the firefighter shifting the load on his shoulder, he lost his 3-point contact while he was carrying the roof kit. Also, no life belts were used, and specifically, they talk about it later in that when he stopped to adjust the load he was carrying, he didn't tie in, and therefore using both hands and not being able to hold on. And then the overall weight of PPE the firefighter was carrying and the tools may have been a factor. The firefighter in question was of a more slight build, and they wondered if maybe all the weight and stuff may have thrown him a bit off balance. The angle of the aerial ladder, and when we'll post the pictures on our social media feeds when we post the episode, but it is quite steep at being about 73 degrees, so over 70. The recommendations based on these findings of contributing factors is fire departments should ensure that carrying methods of equipment and tools are safe and secure. The discussion is, of course, firefighters carry equipment such as hoses, axes, ladders, chainsaws, and fire extinguishers into and around the fire scene to rescue victims and extinguish the fire. This, of course, may include climbing many flights of stairs or ladders. One of the most common tools in the fire service for carrying, raising, lowering various tools and equipment from one elevation to another is rope and or webbing. This fire department trains using the above method reference, but a specific fire department standard operating guideline should be generated to address specific methods for securing and carrying each type of equipment or tool. If customized packs or slings are used, thorough evaluation should be conducted to determine their effectiveness and safety. Another option is maybe mounting some tools near the tip of an aerial ladder, provided that the apparatus manufacturer can endorse the method of attachment and the effects of the dimensional properties of the aerial ladder and stability. In this incident, the firefighter was carrying 2 6-foot rubbish hooks strapped together with a web sling weighing about 20 pounds, cantilevered over one shoulder, and not utilizing the web sling to support the load. It is unknown why the firefighter did not use the sling, as it was taught in the training academy. The tiller member had noticed that the firefighter had stopped to adjust the roof kit on his shoulder prior to his fall. After the incident, the rubber hooks were found missing the cinch strap for the D handles, so the opposite end of the hooks, if you will, as part of the web sling. So they don't know why, but maybe it was missing, and that's why he didn't use the sling. He just decided to take them up, to get my job done. Unfortunately.
So when you're learning to climb ladders as a firefighter, you're learning to climb ground ladders, and it's always 3-point contact, right? And so when you climb your ground ladder, you're supposed to climb with your hands on the rungs, right? But they also teach you another technique for climbing with a tool in your hand, right? Where you have the one hand and you slide the tool along the rail on the one side, and on the other side you slide your hand along the other rail, and that's how you maintain your 3-point contact. But this firefighter looked to be climbing an 86-foot ladder, an aerial ladder, using what technique? Because he had one hand holding these tools on his shoulders. So that meant his other hand, normally when you climb an aerial ladder, you have to go rung by rung because the handrail is so tall, there's no effective way to wrap your arm around it. All you can do is run your hand up the handrail. So that is likely what he was doing. And as you all know from climbing a ladder, particularly the steeper it is, the handrail is up near your shoulder. So it's an awkward way to carry it. But this ladder angle is not an unusual angle. It's in the mid 70s, and the proper angle for a ladder is anywhere between 70 and 76 degrees, 70 some odd degrees. That's what's in the NFPA standard for the recommended angle on ground ladders.
I think it's 60 to 70 on an aerial ladder is the recommended climbing angle.
Yeah. And it's lower for aerial ladders, correct?
Yeah, because of that high railing.
Right, exactly. So So this ladder was at an angle that would be more common for a ground ladder, and ground ladders are significantly shorter than this. So it's hard to know what was going through his head when he decided to climb this distance at that angle with only one free hand, and then stopped once or twice on the way up to readjust the load, um, with no way of tying in. Even if he had had a ladder belt on with a with a with a hook on it for tying in, it's hard to understand how he would even have been able to tie in with that because he only had the one free hand. So you'd have had to get the hook free from your belt, bring it over, and hook it into a rung or hook it into the
while
handrail or
while
something.
standing on 2 feet. Yeah,
Well, not able to bring your shoulder
yeah.
carrying the tools in tight to the ladder to counterbalance
Hmm.
yourself with a air pack on your back. So difficult decisions were made here, and they resulted in the fall. And it's hard to ask the questions later. So, recommendation number 2, fire departments should ensure that a designated safety officer is appointed for training evolutionists. So, this is a fundamental, really, and of all training. And we've talked about it a number of the other incidents that we've done related to training. And this is always seems to be a weak point, is having adequate safety officers on scene. So the fire department should appoint a qualified safety officer that meets the qualifications defined in NFPA 1521. And so if NFPA 1521 is a fire incident safety officer. Chapter 1521, NFPA 1521, Chapter 5.3.4. So this is an older report, so it's probably not the same reference anymore. It says the health and safety officer shall ensure that safety supervision is provided at all live fire training activities.
Not
Safety,
fire, all live.
I'm sorry, live training activities, right? Safety supervision should be provided throughout the training and continue throughout the breakdown and termination of the training. In other words, from start to finish. And prior to the incident, the station captain did hold a briefing to describe the training scenario, identifying everyone's roles and assigning 3 captains as acting instructors observers. It's not clear if any of them had been NFPA 1521 trained. Also, it's now considered normal practice to hold briefings before training events and to actually go through all the safety aspects of the incident because it's
Yeah.
training. It's You're supposed to be learning. You're not supposed to be necessarily proficient. You're practicing new techniques, or at least refining existing techniques.
There's some instructors out there that really like to practice a sort of crawl, walk, run training evolution where you walk through it slowly, discussing it in normal clothing, not geared up, no stress, and then you walk through it again slowly, maybe with all your gear on, but for a fire, essentially no fire. Slowly building the muscle memory in the correct manner so you always do it correctly rather than doing it wrong and then saying, okay, you should have done this. That's one good way. They could have done this maybe without BA on, without carrying tools first, just to get used to it. Although if it was me, my thighs would hurt after climbing the 86 feet and coming back down and doing it again. But, that's maybe something here. And it didn't say specifically that any of these instructor observers were identified as a safety officer. And I think that's it's just like I teach, you all know I teach incident command. And once the participants put the vest on that says safety or command or whatever they are, you step into the role. And unless someone designated them and said, okay, Paul or Denis, you're the safety officer for this evolution today, your spiny senses aren't tingling looking for potential, looking more for potential problems, which maybe if someone was designated safety, they might have said, hey, hang on, how come he's not using that strap, for example?
Yeah, and I know there's people who will say that it's everybody's job to look after safety,
For sure.
and it is. And individually, like this firefighter who who suffered from his decisions, you know, probably should have, brought it up at the very beginning. Says this tool is not safe for climbing. It's not set up properly.
Yeah.
Um, Give me a piece of rope, or do something, or let's change the evolution. Let's do something. And other people were probably not really observing him that closely.
Right.
It was,
Everybody's doing their thing. It's a training thing, right? Yep.
yeah. And plus, there was an additional burden here. I think there was a lot of actors involved, and we saw this in Charleston, which was a real fire, and that had very tragic consequences. I think 9 died in that one. There's a lot of actors involved, and there's a lot of actors involved here too. And this was part of their training. Clearly, was an opportunity to work in those positions as actors and to refine their skills. So we don't know, for instance, if this drill had been done, the previous shift, and this was a
Yeah.
follow drill. We don't know that. That wasn't actually part of the investigation
Mhm.
notes. So
And probably not done too frequently because the hotel's in operation. That was always my challenge as a training officer, to find buildings that were realistic that I could use without disturbing the patrons of the building. I know we had one evolution where a hotel was doing all new renovations, gutting all the carpets and painting and everything, and they said, hey, on this day, if you guys want to come and do some multi-floor dwelling fire practices, you could come, because it wouldn't matter if we banged up the walls a bit and dragged hoses on the floor and stuff like that, which is good, but those don't come very often. So
true.
it's a
And
it's a
climbing
challenge.
climbing an aerial ladder, uh, you know, with all your kit and gear and carrying other gear with you is a relatively high risk operation.
Yep.
There's not much in the way of safety guidelines, or not safety guidelines, but safety systems in place to prevent you from falling. You're really relying very heavily on your 3 point of contact and your skills. And you're climbing in your PPE. It's a not a hot day, but it's a warmish day. You're lugging tools and gear and everything with you. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next one here. But there's you don't need to be at a site to practice those skills. You can do those in the parking lot as far as that goes. It's good though to do them at a site because it helps to focus you in on the job itself. But
Many
close,
times I did, when I did my training of new firefighters or recruit firefighters for ladder operations, we would put a harness on them and have an aerial ladder truck over them, and then that was the safety. So if they slipped on the ground ladder, climbing to the second or third floor, the aerial ladder device was an anchor. So at least we had something to hold them in case they fell. Of course, probably Denny's shaking his head, going, "Hang on, dynamic load on the end of the ladder. You know how much?" But it was better than nothing. So, and if
yeah,
the ladder was appropriately
we
set
used
up,
to
it'd
use
be
a
okay.
belay line, but you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're not saying that this guy didn't have these skills and hadn't already
No.
done
No.
a dozen times before, and maybe done them for real multiple times. But this time it didn't work out.
Recommendation number 3 states that fire departments should ensure firefighters minimize the risks by using a life belt on any time they stop to do work while ascending or descending an aerial ladder. Obviously, they're not retained while they're ascending or descending, but if they're stopping to do work, it's a great idea to lock in with a ladder belt and a pompier hook or whatever you have. Unfortunately, as Denis already explained, he still would have had to use his hand to make that happen. So to lock in would have been a challenge for this fellow, because one hand was basically in use the whole time holding the tools. The discussion on this is the use of ladders in the fire service, of course, well established. In order to maintain the safe and efficient use of these ladders, firefighters must rigorously be trained and know the characteristics and proper uses of these various types of ladders, which is what they were doing. Firefighters are expected to wear full PPE and carry and hoist needed equipment and tools while climbing. This causes safety concerns when trying to maintain 3 point contact while climbing a ladder. 3 point contact means that 2 hands and 1 foot, or 2 feet and 1 hand, are in contact with the ladder at all times, which is a recommended safety practice under OSHA. Excuse me. It's good safety practice as per NFPA 1932 as well, which is the use and service maintenance of ladders, ground ladders, that a class 1 harness or ladder belt be worn when a ladder or vertical angle greater than 70 degrees is used, as per NFPA 2015. It is good safety practice, regardless of the angle, that a ladder belt be used when working off a ladder or whenever hands must be used to complete a task, resulting in the loss of your 3-point contact. In this incident, the firefighter was observed stopping to adjust the shoulder strap on the roof kit. And it's kind of odd because he was adjusting the shoulder strap, but at one time they talked about he had them over his shoulder, like the tool over the shoulder. So I'm not too sure there, and that's just what the report says, so that's all we know. This action may have caused him to lose his balance and 3-point contact. A life belt would have enabled him to hook to the ladder prior to adjusting the shoulder strap, thus serving as a third point of contact. Would have been tricky to do, especially at 73 degrees in an aerial ladder.
Yeah. This referenced NFPA 1932 requiring or recommending the use of ladder belts. That's not in NFPA 1932. So I'm not sure where that came from.
Oh,
It,
you looked it up?
yeah, it may be something out of OSHA, or maybe it was in a previous version. The current version, I think, is 2020, something like that. So that's not
Okay.
in there. Because I was curious, because it didn't ring a bell with me. So I went and looked in there, and it's not there. So I'm not sure where that comes from. But certainly, when you buy an aerial truck, it's required to be provided with at least 4 ladder belts. And the reason the ladder belts are required to be there is for the purposes of tying in for safety purposes when you're on the ladder. So
Hence
there's
our Texas episode where the two fellows fell out of the ladder because they had no safety belts.
Yeah, it was platform actually, that particular one, right? So
Platform, yeah.
yeah, this is a straight ladder, but straight ladders have always got their challenges for fall prevention, right? Because you've really only got the rails on the side. That's all you've got. So if you don't have a tie-off device or a positioning device is really what it is. It's difficult to work off that ladder in any safe manner. And when he's up there adjusting, carried loads and so forth, he's essentially working off the ladder. And it would have been good to be tied in, but it would have been difficult with your hands being full. So recommendation number 4, fire departments should ensure that the overall weight of equipment and tools does not compromise their safety. So part of the discussion on this is firefighting is physically demanding. There's no question about that. Firefighters carry 80 to 100 pounds of equipment, often, such as hoses, axes, ladders, chainsaws, and extinguishers, into and around the fire scene as they proceed to rescue victims or extinguish fires. This also includes, of course, their PPE. This may include, in part, climbing flights of stairs and, in this case, ladders. One of the most common tools in the fire service for carrying, raising, or lowering of various tools and equipment from one elevation to another is the use of rope or webbing. It's one of the things you practice, right, is hoisting equipment and tools. In this incident, the firefighter was carrying approximately 50% additional to his body weight up the ladder, with the PPE and tools accounting for about 110 pounds of gear. So that was in addition to his own weight. So he was carrying his PPE and accessories, which were 47 pounds, his SCBA 36 pounds. The roof kit was around 20 pounds, and he had an axe with him too, 7 pound, probably in
In
a
a holster.
belt pouch, yeah, holster. So in addition to the sheer weight, how it was distributed and carried may have been a factor, considering the BA and possibly likely his axe too was at the back of the body, so it doesn't get tangled up.
All above the waist.
Right, and of course they mentioned, for instance, he's carrying his radio in his chest pocket. He's got his mask in another pouch on his chest, so that would preclude holding himself close against the ladder. And at the steep angle, he would have been very close to bumping his chest on the way up, as it is, anyways. So it was an awkward position to be climbing, let alone juggling these tools over his shoulder.
Recommendation number 5 states that fire departments should ensure placement of aerial ladders yield the optimal climbing angle for firefighter safety. There are obviously several variables that have to be considered when positioning an aerial ladder. They include proper distance between structure or the object and the aerial to achieve the maximum stability, the best climbing angle, and adequate extension ability. The ladder is only so long. Choosing an optimal climbing angle may require more than simply implementing a 4-to-1 or 75-degree angle rule. This rule has been derived from OSHA standards that do not account for the heights firefighters may climb to, nor the bulk. So this comes from working, with ground ladders, basically. The
Ground ladders.
weight, yeah, ground ladders. So then we're applying it to an aerial ladder. It might be a little steep. The weight and positioning relative to the body of the tools that they carry. Specifically, no other industry routinely climbs to heights experienced by firefighters using aerial ladders. Furthermore, firefighters' tools, PPE, SCBA, place burdens on the body that are unique among workers that use these ladders. For example, firefighting helmets are heavier than the traditional hard hat, putting excess weight high on the body, engaging the neck, shoulder, and back muscles. Turnout ensembles, turnout gear, are heavier and bulkier than regular clothing or coveralls, which restricts movement more than most other traditional work clothes. Firefighting boots are heavier than most any other work boot, putting more strain on leg muscles. Furthermore, their bulk and rigidity affect the wearer's ability to sense the surface of the object that they're placing their feet on. The
So critical as a
SCBA,
fire, so critical as a firefighter to get gear that fits.
yes, very important. That's right. And
And
years ago, of course, it was like, here's some stuff that might fit you, and you're going to have to make it do until we order more.
sure, and I've seen lots of firefighters that walk around with their pants undone, just hanging on suspenders, right?
Yeah,
And we don't know if this guy was doing that, but try climbing a ladder that way. You can't,
yeah, you
because
can't.
you get crotch bound, for instance. So wearing your gear properly and having gear that fits properly, including your boots, everything is critically important.
The SCBA, of course, places 30 pounds or more behind the wearer, engaging the muscles throughout the body and affecting your balance. Furthermore, the optimal place for carrying heavy loads, the back and waist, is no longer readily available for other tools and equipment. Traditional slings and harnesses often need modification to accommodate the wearing of the SCBA. The firefighters' tools the tools firefighters routinely carry up ladders are often much heavier than those that would be expected to be carried in other industries. They must often be carried further and with more urgency. In this incident, the aerial ladder was parked parallel to the building, with the aerial ladder extended 86 feet at a 73-degree angle perpendicular to the street. We'll supply some photos, which is in accordance with fire department and manufacturer guidelines. The manufacturer does not recommend an angle greater than 75 degrees. The above-mentioned tactical firefighting, specific, and general human factor considerations should be incorporated into SOGs and pre-incident plans that suit the fire department's local situation, and training should occur often. Given the additional demands and stresses placed on firefighters during ladder climbs, fire departments should consider adopting a maximum of 70 degrees or less for aerial and perhaps all other ladder operations. So it's something to consider, and that's something to look at when you're buying an aerial ladder, is its rated height at what elevation. Because you can always cheat a little bit by going to 78 or 80, but try to climb an aerial at 78 degrees and it's basically straight up. You'll perceive that it's straight up even though it's not. So that's something to think about. And here they were, pushing the envelope for climbing straight up, basically, with a whole bunch of tools.
So if you look at NFPA 1932, which specifically addresses ground ladders, they specifically caution using ground ladders at 70 degrees or less angle as being potentially unstable and prone to slipping out, and where the foot of the ladder needs to be restrained in some way, tied off or some other thing. So using, low ladder angles for all ladders as recommended here would be contrary to the NFPA standard for
Right.
ground ladders.
For ground ladders, yeah. But this is
Right.
an aerial ladder.
So, and most of us who have climbed ground ladders at low angles know how difficult that is to do. It's not easy. But for aerial ladders, it would appear to be, eminently
And I just
practical.
want to clarify, the reason for the higher or the steeper angle on a ground ladder is so that the bottom doesn't kick out. So there's not too much weight wanting it to kick out. If the bottom is secured, then it's perfectly acceptable to use your ground ladder at a lower angle. The ladder's strong enough. It's just that
Right.
you don't want it to slip out. There's a famous video from Quebec, from a residential fire where two guys went up a ladder and the ladder slipped out on them on a concrete driveway
Yep.
because it wasn't secured. So that's another.
Yep.
We should do a tailboard talk on which way to heel the ladder, from the front or the back. Anyway, we won't go there today.
Lots of things to talk about. Recommendation 6. Fire departments should ensure that all standard operating guidelines are reviewed, and updated on a regular basis. Discussion. The fire service faces and responds to changes on a routine basis. Things are always changing. These changes involve new management and administrative policies, personnel, and expanding missions with shrinking resources, increasing legal and regulatory requirements, growing complexity in equipment and tactics, and dealing with other agencies and reporting, just to name a few. In reviewing the SOGs for the department as part of this review, it was noticed that some of these SOGs were decades old. I'm not sure that references specifically to this incident, but that's what they noticed. So the fire departments must deal with changes regularly and should consider a periodic review of their SOGs.
So I've got a bit of a supplement here. So there's an article that Fire Rescue One had put out, and it was recopied from the Los Angeles Times in 2018. Um, so it was a routine training exercise that occurred here where there was a fatality, and California Division of Occupational Health and Safety actually charged the fire department on a few counts in this incident. Los Angeles had not had a fatality incident since 1985. So that's a really good record compared to some other departments that we covered in this podcast. But nevertheless, this happened.
Especially with the
Uh,
volume of calls.
Sorry?
Like we were saying in this particular incident, they had 15,000 fire calls in one day.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, they're doing well safety wise and following proper procedures, which is good. But this stuff happens. It happens so quickly. Officials with the Occupational Health and Safety Department of Cal OSHA sent the department a special order to instruct on establishing it to implement procedures for using aerial ladders safely. The department must ensure workers maintain 3 points of contact with the ladder at all time, 2 hands and 1 foot, or 2 feet in 1 hand. After visiting the accident site, the regulators concluded that Wong had been holding a fire department roof kit strapped together while he was on the ladder. This incident was caused by carrying the roof kit in his hand rather than secured to his back, thereby not allowing him to maintain 3 points of contact while ascending the ladder. The OSHA official says their order requires the city to take corrective steps to prevent serious and fatal falls in the future. The fire department has filed an appeal, calling the order vague and ambiguous and arguing that it provided little guidance on how to comply. The OSHA officials say they issue special orders to correct unsafe condition, a device, or a place of employment that poses a threat and which is not covered by existing state regulations. In this case, the agency says the fire department cannot allow workers to transport tools in a way that will put them at risk of falling from ladders. So it's going on, and this was still going on back in 2018. I don't know if there's been what resolution has happened since then, but you're just reinforcing that we need to have a sling or something to make sure that we're working safely in whatever situation we're in.
I
And then
know I know that some people will be upset over the fact that OSHA actually charged the fire department. And I've talked to people before about this and about the issue is, if there's a death at work, they shouldn't be laying charges. I mean, it was already a tragic incident. It's hard on the fire department, it's hard on everybody. But the reality is that you can't have a death at work and not be understanding that it was likely preventable. And if that's the case, then for sure there's going to be charges. There just has to be. And
we,
so there
we,
was
we
a
have to
good
be held
recommendation.
accountable.
Yes, exactly.
Even fire departments have to be held accountable to following safe work procedures. This happened in Ontario there at the Listowel. This happened in Yellowknife, where the fire department was charged and implemented training practices. Look at Baltimore City, and they did a whole bunch more incident command training after they lost the 3 firefighters in the fire in 2022, which had helped them since, although still they're in the news. That's another thing that was in the news was the fire department has not been able to add the fire incident technicians or drivers for the battalion chiefs. They didn't have the funding, which was one of the 4 recommendations from the report in 2022 or 2021.
Yeah. So anyway, the results of this incident, of course, Paul, was a tragic, preventable death, unfortunately.
Yep. which is why we do the podcast. That's kind of why I wasn't going to do this one, but then I read it and I'm going, you know what? This is, a fairly routine procedure that we do all the time, and a few little things cause a fatality. So I thought it was worth doing an episode on it because it's an easy one to learn here. Tie the tools together, sling them over your shoulders. Don't do the, hey, and I did it today. I told Denny I washed the windows on the house today, and I ascended to the second floor of my roof, and I carried the bucket of water up with me and the squeegee on the ladder. So not as risky. I wouldn't probably have died if I fell down onto the grass, but it surely would have hurt.
Yes. And this was a young fellow, 29 years old, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm sure he felt completely capable of doing that job that day. But unfortunately, a small mistake led to a tragic result.
As we all do, right? We just get in there and do it, and then this happens. So, which is why we need policies and procedures and training.
Yeah, he didn't come to work that day expecting not to go home.
Right. Okay, well, that wraps up another episode for the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Thanks a lot for listening. We appreciate your interest. Hopefully, you learned something from them. Continue to follow us on the favorite app you have. Give us a like or a thumbs up. And you can also follow us on our socials, Twitter and Facebook page. And you can also email us at the emergencytrafficpodcast@gmail.com. And as Sergeant Phil Esterhaus said in the old TV series Hill Street Blues, let's be safe out there.
Take care every day.